Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois. On this show, I interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others. We're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us. Hello. Ooh, collective deep breath. I really long for the day that I'm not going to have to be worrying about talking about something terrible that is happening in the world when I address the podcast. This is my first time back behind the mic since the Buffalo shooting by the white supremacist. And there's nothing I can say, right? It's funny, I've been kind of judging myself for not having posted about it on social media. And then I just thought, I can't right now. I can't. And I've been watching people that I love who are Black really be impacted just by yet another example of hatred. And I watch their pain, and there's nothing that I can do other than love them and listen to them and believe them and all of the activation that they're experiencing. And I'm fucking tired of it, right? I'm tired of not being able to do something to stop this. And I do believe, when I can get centered back in my heart, I do believe that this podcast puts good out into the world. I believe that every single one of you that comes to this podcast, that we are all committed to the fight. We're all committed to trying to create a more just world where people don't get killed just because of the color of their skin or, insert whatever quote unquote difference, right? I actually think there's probably more people that would identify as different than people who would identify as quote unquote normal, right? Normal's boring anyway, right? Boring and annoying. Who wants to be normal? I mean, I guess a lot of people do, but at any rate, I just wanted to acknowledge that horrific event here and just share with you that I am holding it in my heart. So as we move on here, one of the things I wanted to share, last invitation to join me in my Wounded Healer virtual group that's going to be starting on June 7th. So if you're listening to this when it drops on June 1st, this is last call for any mental health professionals who want a place where they can go connect with other people who are on the same journey and potentially dealing with burnout. Whatever it is that you want to bring to the table, we create a really juicy, lovely, supportive, connective healing space for other mental health professionals. So if you want to check that out, you can go to tinyurl.com/woundedhealers, V as in virtual, G as in group, -2. That's tinyurl.com/woundedhealers, VG-2. All right, now on to today's guest, because she's amazing and wonderful, and I feel really privileged to have been able to learn from her and have a conversation with her. So without further ado, today's guest is Kerri Kelly. And Kerri is the founder of CTZNWELL, a movement that is democratizing well-being for all. A descendant of generations of firemen and first responders, Kerri has dedicated her life to kicking down doors and fighting for justice. She's been teaching yoga for over 20 years and is known for making waves in the wellness industry by challenging norms, disrupting systems, and mobilizing people to act. You can see why I like her, right? A community organizer, wellness activist, and author of the forthcoming book, American Detox, The Myth of Wellness and How We Can Truly Heal, Kerri is recognized across communities for her inspired work to bridge transformational practice with social justice. She's been instrumental in translating the practices of well-being into social and political action, working in collaboration with community organizers, spiritual leaders, and policymakers to transform our systems from the inside out. Her leadership has inspired a movement that is actively organizing around issues of racial and economic justice, healthcare as a human right, civic engagement, and more. Kerri is a powerful facilitator, TED speaker, and is the host of the prominent podcast Citizen, spelled CTZN. You can learn more about her work at kerrikelly.co and CTZNWELL.org. So please enjoy this wonderful, heart-centered, juicy, I can't even say enough superlatives for it, conversation with Kerri Kelly. Hello, Carrie Kelly. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hello, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me.
I am really excited. We've already been talking, already getting into the stuff before we started recording.
Yeah, we have.
So yeah, I'm really excited.
This is going to be juicy, y'all.
Yes, it is. Yes. So yeah, get out your napkins because you're going to be wiping your chin.
That's right. That's right. Get comfortable, get what you need, buckle up.
Yeah. So I found you. I'm so excited. I've been taking the Embodied Social Justice course with Rev Angel Kyoto Williams, and it's been a wonderful experience. And you are sort of the host of like the White Bodied Connection.
Yes.
And I went to the first intro with you and I was like, I love everything about you. You attend to nuance in such a beautiful way. Everything. And so I immediately reached out to you and saw you have this book. And I'm like, oh my God, yes, all of this. I want to talk to you. So that's why
you're
that
feedback.
Here. Yay. You're welcome.
Yay. Yeah. I'm glad we found each other.
Yeah. Well, tell us, you are more than just this person who facilitates this white-bodied space. So tell us more about you.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm glad you started with that because that's become a big focus of my work because I live and breathe in a white body and that has enormous implications and impacts. And so much of my work over the last, 10 to 15 years has been grappling with that and understanding that for myself, which is a lot of that is in this book, American Detox. It's like my own very messy, you've read it. So you're like, it's very, very messy modeling of like what it is to be like, oh, fuck, I'm white. And
I would say honest and vulnerable, not messy.
Thank you. Thank you. I own the mess of it and the mistake. I'm trying to learn how to be cool with them and know that I can survive them so I can keep going.
Right.
So yeah, that's who I am in the world, and especially in the context of America and wellness. And I'm also coming to know myself as more than that. And I feel like that's really important for white people to discover too, that we're more than what whiteness has told us we are. And I'm more than American. I'm Irish and I'm Italian and I'm Jewish and I'm German. And so I'm in a process right now of what Reverend Angel calls going back to get myself so that I can understand who and what I come from, the culture I come from, the medicine I come from, so that I can build an orientation to home that is outside of the membership and the lie, quite frankly, of white supremacy. So I'm all of those things. I'm a New Yorker. Which is Lenape land. You and I talked about that already. I always have to say that. I'm the daughter of nurses and firemen. I have many, many generation of firemen in my family. They were called water carriers, actually. In the 1300s, it's on our family crest.
Wow.
And I'm a cis straight, mostly able-bodied, although I broke my back 7 years ago and learned a lot about disability that I wasn't able to understand until that moment. And socialized in America, and socialized towards achieving and overachieving and performing and being productive and striving for perfection and climbing the ladder pretty relentlessly, which is what I did for the first 25 years of my life. I am also the person who's been for the last, 20 years trying to unlearn, unpack, and unravel that shaping.
Yeah. Thank you for that beautiful way you put all that out. It's so succinct. I'm very impressed by that. I'm always just like blah, 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 rambling everywhere.
It took many years. The book was really helpful, I have to tell you. I think people think you sit down and you write a book, and that's not how it went for me. A lot of rolling around on my mat, and it was a lot of sitting with what is the truth of who I am. And I had to do a lot of research and a lot of reckoning. And I just say that as these words don't come easily to me, and I was not born with them. I had to find them, right?
Yeah.
And I had to distill them, and I had to really learn how to understand myself and then do my best to articulate it and embody it, of course, which is a big part of my practice.
Yeah. Well, if I ask the question how you come to this work, we can also tell listeners and potential readers that you share this story in the book as well. Can you tell us what was the wake up moment for you?
Yeah. So my wake up call came on, it's funny because I think there were wake up calls before that, but the way that I've come to know my stubborn self is that the universe has to slap me upside the head to be like, yeah, hello, can you see, what's really happening? And so for me, it was 9/11. It was an enormous, unimaginable event. And that impacted so many people, right? So I'm not alone in that. It's a real shared, I think, wake up call for many.
Yeah.
And my stepdad was a fireman. He was a lieutenant at Ladder 15, which was located in the South Street Seaport. And they were the second house to respond to, well, actually, they responded after the first plane hit Tower 1. And as they were driving, because they were a couple blocks away, they saw the second plane hit. And they rerouted themselves to respond to the second tower. And from what I understand, one of the great miracles of our story is that so many people don't know what happened in those moments. And we actually were able to recover the radio tapes of all of his interactions in the towers. And they're actually in the museum. So you can actually listen to him. I mean, it's just like fucking ridiculous. And so, and it was hard to hear. And it was also like the greatest blessing to understand, to hear his voice in those moments and to hear, oh, hold on a second.
Yeah.
A dog just ran out the door.
Oh, God.
Fuck.
C-spot run, literally.
The door's double locked and he opened the door and ran away. I'm so sorry.
We're leaving this in, by the way. That's hilarious.
That dog is so smart.
That's crazy.
Okay, so now I've double locked it, and then I actually wrapped a rope around, and then I blocked it with a stool. So that's what's happening over here.
Oh my God. Okay. Heart attack over. All right.
You saw me like jump into action. So that's sort of some of what I've inherited from my ancestors. I want to say is that I have a first responder embodied spirit. I'm like quick to jump. I'm quick to jump into burning buildings. I'm quick to respond. Folks who are close to me know that I'm very good in crisis. And as was, my stepdad. And, so much of what I heard from him in those tapes is, I could hear his fear and I could hear his commitment, like he kept going. He ran up 78 flights of stairs, when so many people were running out. And he actually, the last we heard from him, he was on the 78th floor. And I think that either the door got busted, he got stuck in the stairwell, essentially. And he said, and he was talking to someone on the other side of the wall who was on the floor of impact. And he said, I'll be right to you. Like, I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
And then the tower fell and we lost him. And so that was, as you can imagine, a massive, massive disruption of a very like clearly articulated, like should path that I had paved out for myself.
Yeah.
I was like, here's who I'm going to be in the world. And I'm climbing this ladder and we're going to have a house and a family and all the things on the checklist. And that moment obviously blew all of that up. And everything that I had known to be, normal and safe came down with those towers. And so that was sort of the beginning of my unraveling, quite frankly. And it was sort of when I started to really question everything. Almost immediately, I started to question everything, question the government, question what was happening, how it was handled, question my life, question my career. I had just gotten married. I mean, I questioned everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't get any answers, of course, but that began a long journey, 21 years now of asking the questions, asking the hard questions, asking what did I learn, what's true,
right? And
who am I, right? And how did we get here? How did we get to a place where, our city, my city gets attacked in this way and has to suffer this wound and this loss? And I in some of my digging, I talk a lot about how when we kind of reckon with like, how did this happen for the many different crises we're navigating, often we can look back at history,
right,
to see where it began, where the story began. And in many ways, it began with imperialism.
Right.
And colonization, which is one of the, the core wounds, the roots of this country. And so anyway, so that was sort of my wake up call. And it wasn't like, I often have to tell people, I think people sometimes assume a wake up call is like literally a light bulb and you're like, ding, I know everything. And it was not that.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
more like, I know nothing.
Right.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
And what is it? And how, what is it? How do I, I was just lost, quite frankly. I was genuinely lost. And I was like, who am I now? What is the truth of anything?
Yeah.
And how do I move forward?
Yeah. And something that I really related to in the book, when you talk about the aftermath of that and this unraveling, as you call it. And I think you said something like, I'm like watching everybody else move on and I'm not okay. And yet nothing can slow down for me. And that's something I relate to in my own recovery from all of life, really.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of listeners can really relate to. And that I keep trying to figure out how to be better at explaining how I get from that to white supremacy. But it's like now that I see white supremacy everywhere, anytime it's like rushed or push forward, like, produce, right? Like all of that is white supremacy and not having space to grieve, not having rituals for grief, right? For a lot of our cultural rituals have been stripped. So anything you want to add there?
Well, and in that, I love that you said that. And what you're naming also makes me think about the pandemic and how intolerant so many of us were, for good reason, to like not just the calamity and the uncertainty of what was happening, which I think drove a lot of people to like buying into some really fucked up conspiracies, right? We saw that happen. But also just like the desire to return to normal. Like, let's get back to work. Let's get back to normal. I want to go out and see my friends. Right. Which I just want to say, like, I wanted that too. So I want to validate that, wanting community and people and connection again and to go outside and to, and when I think about what we're being asked to reckon with, given like global pandemics and climate change, I think it's probably dangerous for people in power, for systems of power, to allow people to have the space and time to really feel and reckon and ask questions about like, what the fuck, how did this happen? And did this many people need to die? And I think the same thing happened for me on 9/11. Like people were just like, I remember like there was literally a moment where I remember being on the streets of New York City because it was like also radical how different it was, like how still everything got. And the night of 9/11, I was with my mom on the Upper East Side and we were just like, we didn't know anything. We didn't know where Joe was. We had no information. And so then we drove, I think someone drove us, or maybe my mom drove us home from the Upper East Side to Pelham, which is where I lived. And it was a ghost town. I shit you not. There was not one, I mean, this is Manhattan. There wasn't one car on the road. It was like just our car. I mean, it was like the most dystopian shit ever. And so I remember that like being like, everything has changed. Like nothing will ever be the same. And then I also remember the first taxi horn I heard. Yeah. It was like, get out of the way, lady, like in New York. And I was like, oh, we're there again. You know what I mean? And so that was like, I had a lot of dissonance around that. I was like, I'm not ready to move on. I'm not ready to, I'm not ready to close the door on this chapter. I also wasn't really ready to give up on his life. I wasn't ready to give up on finding his body. And so there was a lot that I was like unwilling to do. And yet there were a lot of people who were wanting to move forward, and not just wanting to move forward, wanting to retaliate, wanting to go get those fuckers. And that's just not where I was. And I was, and so I appreciate you saying that, because it was like, I did feel really alone in that. And I felt really lost. And I didn't know what recovery looked like from that. I was like, what the fuck do I do now? Like, I just can't move forward as I was.
That's exactly how I feel about the pandemic. That's exactly it, right? Like I am a serial extrovert and all of a sudden I can't be with people in the same way anymore. I'm more attuned to the energies and what's going on internally, and I just can't move at the pace I used to move at. And I refuse to, right? And this is what you're talking about, this detox that that's the invitation that we want everybody to have. And at the same time, I am really fucking uncomfortable. And being this tuned in is exhausting. And so I understand completely why people are dissociated, why they're numbing out, why they're not picking up this fight.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I, by the way, resonate with the serial extrovert thing. And then like the pandemic happening and being like, I love being alone. So I love that no one can find me. Like, it was like, I couldn't even, it was like so weird. I'm 46 years old and it was like, it took me that. And then it made me wonder. And I also like, I'm having a hard time being an extrovert again.
Yes.
And I went through some real mental health stuff after that, where I was like, I don't know how to be in the world again. And, but one of the things I've been questioning is like how much of my extroversion was natural and how much was conditioned.
I'm wondering that too. Yeah.
Right. Like, and now that I'm like more in touch with myself, I'm like, I'm not entirely an extrovert. Like, I like my time. I need my privacy. Yeah. I want to be quiet. So anyway, so thank you so much for saying that. And I think you're right in that, like, as someone who's constantly trying to nudge people to feel and to feeling uncomfortable, I think we also need to hold compassion for how fucking hard that is.
Mm-hmm. Right. And something that came to mind earlier that relates now is it's so uncomfortable, and the forces that we're reckoning with, it would be so easy if it's like, okay, we're against Mitch McConnell, right? And we are fighting this one bad guy, but it's an octopus. It's a seven-headed hydra, right? Like when you cut one, another one sprouts in its place. And so I know that for me, the lack...
Great analogy, by the way.
Not mine. That's Robin Henderson Espinosa. I will give it back to them.
Brilliant.
But that's part of... I'm sure it's part of the design of what it continues to keep us exhausted so that we don't keep fighting. And that's something where that part, I think particularly, is where I struggle to find hope, because the question is like, is this ever going to end, right? Like, I love to just go to the final product, right? The final product has to be what I want. Otherwise, it's not worth it, which is, again, white supremacy. So here it is.
Yeah. I really love that. And I love the octopus analogy. And in the book, I use the analogy of like water and air, right? Like the water's polluted, the air is polluted. And I think you're right. You know, in some ways, when we understand that's how culture works, and I really think it's important for people to understand that's how culture works, because I think you're right. It's too easy to point the finger at one bad politician or one KKK white supremacist, right? And that's actually not what's happening, right? We're dealing with systemic issues and cultural issues and structural issues that require systemic, cultural, and structural responses. But when we make it about one bad person or one bad company or one bad thing, we don't treat it with the medicine that's required. So I just love that you brought that up, because that to me is some of the orientation and analysis that we need right now so that we can understand what the problem is and also like how we're being shaped by the problem, right? And so like when I understand it as air and water, I can't not get curious about what I have breathed in from that air.
Right.
And how what's happening on the outside is in fact happening on the inside. And what I'll just share with you, because I know that, so when we understand that culture works in that way and that we're all imprinted and shaped by that culture, whether we like it or not, because we're all situated inside of the water, the soup. I think it can feel overwhelming, right? And pervasive and constant and like never ending. And it's helped me also like locate myself in the way in which I'm not alone. Right? Like I'm in the soup with you and everyone else, right? Who can see the soup, in fact, right? And those who can't. And also it's helped me work with shame in a different way, especially when I make mistakes or when I'm really reckoning with all of the ways I'm implicated and continuing to participate in these systems. I remember that like, it's not because I'm a bad person, right? It's not because I'm the worst person. It's not, It's not because something's wrong with me. It's because I've been conditioned, right? And socialized to be this person. And so therefore, my practice, and that's sort of what I explore in this book, is what does it look like for me to be aware that I'm constantly breathing this air, right? And this air is fucking all the way polluted by so many different things. And what is the practice of detoxing it constantly?
Right.
And then locating myself beyond the veil, right? And that has been helpful for me in like waking up every day and knowing what I'm here to do.
Yeah. Let's see if I'm having like 800 thoughts right now. Let's see if I can coalesce them into something coherent. So we were talking about before we started recording sort of the expectations that some people have in social justice spaces for things to be done the right way, for everybody to be included, right? And so I'm thinking about the perfectionism that comes with that, right? And you talk about perfectionism in your book, and I am right there with you, 100% perfectionist in recovery. And that's almost like, is it a James Baldwin quote, like using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house?
Audre Lorde.
Audre Lorde, thank you. Right? Like if we in the social justice world are expecting perfection of ourselves and everyone else around us to be doing it right all of the time, that's just more of the same. And if we're not examining that that's what it is that's showing up right now when we're criticizing, whoever is using the wrong term or whatever it is, that keeps us from our goals.
Yeah, I want to say what you're naming actually feels like a very simple practice that we can do every day. Like that question of how am I replicating really harmful systems?
Yeah.
That inquiry. And then the next part, which is like, what does it look like for me to do something different? I actually think like that practice, if we did that every day, would be really, really helpful, right? And just helping us like chip away at the conditioning and the shaping and the contortionism, right, that we've inherited. And yeah, like this idea that there's one right way comes from such a just toxic myth of the binary, right? Like that there is one right way. And I feel like some of what makes this work really challenging and complex is like to actually hold that it's a spectrum and there are many, many ways. And also that like we're all really like different, complicated, like we're not all, we're not all the same, right? And so not everybody agrees in social justice about the one right way.
Right.
Even if you share an identity, like no one is a monolith.
Right.
And so to me, that's where relationship is really powerful and listening and curiosity, because I think as we are pursuing, Reverend Angel calls it the righteous way, right? Which isn't like the dominant, it's not like one way, but it's like, what is the way that does the least amount of harm, right? And helps move us forward.
Can I stop you right there? Because the question that comes up for me, this is what I feel like I see happening sometimes in spaces is do the least amount of harm. That means someone still might be harmed.
Yeah.
And it's not okay, but it is.
Well, it's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
Right? Like,
yes,
I think
that's what I mean.
It's inevitable, right? Because we're humans being human and we're going to impact each other from all locations. And the difference, I think that the nuance that we really need to hold is that depending on our social location and our proximity to systems and structures and power, right? Harm can be really, really, really compounded, right? And accumulative, right? Especially when it comes from a body like mine, where like I got all sorts of systems backing me up all the time. And so I just want to name the nuance of that, like, because it's like, to me, this is where it gets messy. It's like we all impact each other and we're all human, but it doesn't stop there. And we're located in different places in proximity to power and privilege and resources and access and enforcement, right? And so like understanding that is awful helpful, because otherwise we impact each other and we're all impacted can be a bypass if it doesn't hold the nuance and the discernment. And some of us have more power, right? And institutions are going to back some of us. And that's what makes the dichotomy between privilege and oppression so precarious, right? Is because privilege isn't just like things that you didn't earn. It often comes with these systems and these structures that like back you up. And that can be really dangerous.
Right. And I'm thinking about when harm is caused. So in the therapy relationship, we fuck up as therapists all the time. And it's not the fact that we fucked up that it's the problem. It's when repair doesn't happen in a relational way. And when it bypasses or minimizes or, excuses the harm that was caused. It's so hard to do that in a group.
It's really hard. Well, and the other thing you're making me think of, and I really appreciate that example because it's making me think of my role as a facilitator, right? I'm often facilitating spaces, is that repair is part of it, but also I think taking responsibility for the power, the unequal power that exists in the room, right? And exposing that for people, because like when I'm in a facilitator role, even if I'm like, doing like really like participatory, distributive facilitation, I'm still in a position of control.
Right.
And so like if I do something or if something happens in the room, like I have a responsibility for that power.
Right.
And so like I would imagine, I'm not a therapist, but I would imagine that therapists are in a position of power too, right?
Exactly.
And so that's also a responsibility
Yeah.
that's unequal, right? In the relationship that needs to be exposed and dealt with as we navigate repair.
Right. And what I found so interesting, also being a facilitator in many different spaces and being a therapist and having power and being a boss, having power in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of women are socialized to not believe we have power oftentimes.
Yep.
Therapists, we want to believe that there's this equal thing happening here between you and me, right? And then, in spaces where we're a white facilitator in a social justice space, it might be like, well, I'm abdicating my power because I'm a white person stepping aside. And again, it's a bypass. So I really think this power piece, I keep talking about it because it's been so influential in my recovery and my reckoning.
Yes.
What's been even more impactful that I found in this course, like the racial stuff, not that I am perfect and get it, but I think I've done enough work now that if you say anything to me about being racist, I'll be like, oh yeah, yep, I get it, own it.
Yes, I am.
It's ableism, and
Mhm.
I guess like education stuff fits in the ableism category. That is where all of my stuff gets triggered, and that is where I have had a really hard time unwinding how we have a society that works but doesn't adhere to all of the rules of white supremacy. I'm like, if I have to let go of time being important to me, I'll lose my mind. I can't do it. So I don't know how I got there from where we started, but
I appreciate that. And I actually think that's really important, right? And when I think back to the people I have learned the most from, bell hooks, who actually may have known everything. But also Barbara Smith and the Combahee River Collective and Angela Davis and Audre Lorde. And I look back at those texts often and their words and their wisdom and what they taught us about intersectionality and about social location. I feel like is really important and is related to what you're saying, because I don't think it's enough to just talk about white supremacy as if it's in isolation. It's not.
Right.
It's actually in collusion, right? With capitalism and individualism and colonization and patriarchy, right? And other ideologies, right? Ableism. And so I just really appreciate, and I'm really working for myself on trying to understand those intersections with more skill and discernment, because it doesn't make sense to validate one identity and invalidate another, or disappear another, or devalue another. And that makes it messier, right? This isn't like the oppression Olympics.
Right.
I do feel like we have to be willing to stand in the midst of that and navigate the complexity of who we are, especially when we're together in like a group and we're moving and working across lines of difference. And I think it also speaks to conflict, right? Because what it's taught me is that, when holding space for group or in relationship with others, that often our needs are different and often our needs are in conflict.
Yes. Thank you.
And so it's
Thank you.
what then, right?
Yes.
How do we show up in those moments and acknowledge that and
Yes.
navigate that together? And maybe the best we can do is just name and acknowledge that there are many needs in the room, and that and sometimes they're in conflict, or that maybe we can't meet all the needs.
Yes.
But that feels more skillful than assuming we're meeting everyone's needs and creating so-called safe spaces, which I fucking hate that term. And instead actually acknowledging what to me is a more likely representation of the human experience, given where we are today,
Okay. Remember to listen to that part over and over again every time you facilitate any discussions, because
me too.
That's it. And I guess the other thing that's coming up for me too is the depth of self-knowledge and ability to see our own truth of our complexities, right? Hold our badness, right? The things that we do that have caused harm before. That's a level of work that not a lot of people get to. And so when we're in these spaces, right, like we're not only holding space for all of these differences of ability and gender and right, all of that stuff, but it's the inner work. And we don't all have access to that work, which is again back to what the book is about, right? We don't have access to it. We might not have the safety for it, right? There's so many complexities there.
I really appreciate that you said that, because I think one of the really horrific and toxic things that wellness sells us is personal solutions to systemic problems. And this idea that you can just,
It's like, let me out. It's all good.
And this idea that you can just like change your mind, like just change your mind and change your attitude and positive vibes only. And you know what? If you're not achieving your goals, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Something you're doing is in the way,
You haven't
right?
manifested it.
Yeah. You and I could do that probably for like an hour, which completely ignores the many systemic and oppressive and unequal and unjust conditions that hold people back from their whole selves, that hold people back from surviving, quite frankly. And so, and I also want to say that like some of the most radically self-aware people I know are also people who have struggled with really unequal and unjust conditions. And so, right, I don't want to create a myth that like only people with privilege and all these great conditions have radical self-awareness. I think that's also absurd. And actually some of the most fucked up assholes I know are some of the wealthiest, most abled, people with access and privilege. And so having said that, I think when we think about what's in the way, to your point of like our knowing ourselves and of our doing what's needed internally to like remove the obstacles, right, that are in the way of courage and conviction and purpose and being in the world and relationship.
We're not going to edit it out. It's totally fine. We're very real here.
Y'all meet Spot. It's not even actually my dog, it's my roommate's dog who's making a cameo on this podcast today.
Well, it's all good.
But there it is. Yeah. Those are the conditions I'm in, y'all, right now. But I think it's really important for us, right, to examine that those are not just inner barriers, that they're external barriers, and they're many, and they're compounded, and they're reinforced, and they're sponsored, and they're fucking on purpose.
Yeah.
And so, right, I just feel like, especially in wellness, where there's like a goalpost of like, be well and be enlightened and blah, 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 right? Like we have to actually understand that the obstacles are not just individual. They're very, very much systemic. And therefore, our wellness practice actually needs to point to that.
Well, and the human experience is the point, right? There is no arriving. And I keep
that part.
Reminding myself, like when I'm in the struggle, like this is the point. And I'm like, fuck you, I don't want that to be the point. I want to get to enlightenment where everything is fine.
This is not good enough, damn it. You know.
But being human is so hard.
Yeah. And I think that's an amazing inquiry. And it's like a question that opens up so much possibility is if we challenge what wellness has taught us that well is, or what dominant culture has taught us that successful is, right? Then that opens up a whole world of possibility, and I really, tackled that question in this book, like, what does it mean to be well?
Right.
And where I arrived literally was like, I don't know. It's actually up to each and every person to be self-determined about like what wellness looks like for them. And they get to be in choice about that. And therefore we need to create the conditions where people can have agency.
Yeah.
And choice,
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Well, I'd love to ask the healer question, because I'm so curious your answer. Would you consider yourself a healer?
No. No.
Just no. Bye. Done.
No, because I can't heal people. People can only heal themselves. And, and I say that especially as like a white Western woman in wellness, right? Where you've got lots of people running around claiming healership and telling people what to do with their lives, which to me sometimes doubles as another way of controlling other people and controlling bodies.
100%.
Right? So like, no. I'm struggling enough just to like heal myself, like how can I be a healer of other people? And one of the things I've learned from my friend Vivette Jeffries, is like an amazing, amazing, amazing human and facilitator and space holder, is that, only you can heal yourself. Right. And so our job as maybe people in healing or people who are supporting healing, or, I don't know how to frame it, is that we fight for the conditions where people have what they need so they can heal. On their terms. themselves, and to me, that's sort of the embodiment and the stance that I want to be a commitment to, right? As we explore healing for ourselves and for each other and for the planet, we have to listen and we have to know our place in that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, because I kind of am in the camp where everyone's a healer, right? So of course I'm a healer because everyone's a healer.
Yes, I love that.
The thing that I keep stumbling on when I have conversations about this, because I do believe that if we stripped away all of the trauma, all of the conditioning, all of the shit that we've experienced, we do have what we need inside of us.
Yeah.
And that we all have access to the answer. And yet we have all the conditioning, we have all the trauma, we have all the ways that we've been gaslit, and then we gaslight ourselves.
Yes.
And I've seen enough clients who are in spaces where they really do need somebody to help mirror the truth to them. And that gets really complex when we're talking about social justice too, because if I have someone in front of me who has a variety of marginalizations that get in the way for them, and they're not seeing themselves clearly, that's a really tough spot to be in as a therapist. And we talk about
What's my role?
Right. We talk about this as a practice, right? Like, it's very easy if it's someone who's just coming in and they like need validation and they're seeing it all clearly. And you're like, yes, but when there's something missing and we have to get to a deeper level, oof, that is hard shit. And I want to be a person who can facilitate the healing of others, regardless of what they've been through, but I can't.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think it's really healthy and skillful of you to be like really clear about your limitations, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm in this body, I have limitations. I don't know if I can support you in what you're asking for. And you're just making me think of two things. One is like, I'm just thinking of consent, right? And how that feels really important in an interaction, especially when we're working across lines of difference, whether it's in like therapy or coaching or just like partnership or, if folks are asking for help, or if you see an opportunity to like reflect something back to people, like ask if they want it. Like, hey, do you want a reflection? Or, hey, can I ask you a question? You know what I mean? Because sometimes I think we assume they do. And you know what I mean? Like, that's such a big part of white saviorism.
Even if you're in a therapy situation, you still need to ask for consent for that, because you have consent to do quote unquote treatment, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're ready for each particular reflection. And therapists can forget that.
I love that so much. That feels so skilled. And I also feel like I can learn a lot from you in this, because I'm not a therapist, but like often I think some of the most powerful reflections are just questions. And it sort of speaks to what you just said. It's like everyone is their own healer. And so it's like, how can we ask questions of possibility? How can we ask questions that encourage people to think differently or to take on a different perspective? And it's not answers and it's not even mirroring as much as it's like, anyway, curiosity,
Right. Yep. Yeah. Curiosity and relationship again. And I guess that's also part of the struggle when someone's wounding prevents them from allowing relationship.
Yeah.
And that makes me really sad. I'm sad that I said that out loud. But that's a big piece.
It's hard. I'm really struggling with this in my life right now. It's really hard to bear witness to another person's suffering.
Yeah.
And to also have the clear seeing to see into their wounds, right? And to their hurt, and maybe even to understand it, right? Sometimes like we can see someone really clearly and we're like, oof, I see what's happening there. And my conditioned tendency when people are like that is like, I want to help you. I want to fix you. I want to get, I want to coach you. I want to give you what you need. I want to like all this fucked up, really unhelpful stuff. And I'm learning this really uncomfortable practice of just witnessing.
Yeah.
And I want to say I'm real bad at it. I am like, I'm like the impulse for me, the embodied probably trauma response and conditioning, the conditioned response to like help or to validate, even like just all of that stuff where I'm just like getting my hands in someone else's shit. Like, I'm really trying to learn the power of just like holding space for someone else to have their own experience and giving them the dignity of like, you know what I mean? Like allowing them to have the dignity of their own experience without my intervention.
Right. Yep. That's some 12-step wisdom right there. I don't
That's
know if
right.
that's where you got it from, but that's where I got it from.
That's exactly where I got it from.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people in my life who have taught me a lot about that. And I just want to say, like, I'm learning that work in this moment. And
it's a very subtle muscle, because I learned a therapy modality where I thought I was pretty good at distancing myself from the client's shit. But once I started learning this modality called NARM, I realized just how much I was doing that, but on a much more like microscopic level, and mostly just internally. Like my external behavior was okay, but it was the internal part that I couldn't tolerate not wanting to help. And so now, oof, that's its own muscle that I keep trying to like every time I have a session and I feel a client like wanting me to fix, and I just I'm like, oh, lean back, lean back.
I want to know what NARM is.
Neuroaffective relational model. It is a modality that's all about complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
It's all relational. It's kind of the way that I describe it, that I'm sure they don't like, but it's psychodynamic. So knowing how our history impacts our present. Buddhism, very much like it helps get this, like, I guess, observer online with the way that we ask a lot of questions. And then Buddhism and somatic therapy. So it's like those three had a baby.
It's NARM.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You just blew my mind, and I'm already Googling it.
Oh, good. Great. Well, we can talk. I'll tell you. I'll refer you to whoever you want to.
I would like to change this interview into me interviewing you all about this modality. That's what's happening, y'all.
Funny.
Thank you for that. That's so helpful. And yeah, I feel like there's so much work there for me, that muscle. And it feels also really relevant to all the other work that we're doing, which is 100%. Like, how do we hold space for variation? How do we hold space for, you know what I mean? Deviation from, like, so-called, I'm air quoting, norm, what we've come to know as norm or normal, right? Mm-hmm. And some of, like, what I've learned in my interactions with folks around this is that, I'm really fucked up, and my conditioned responses are simply considered normal.
Right.
In dominant culture.
Right.
Even though they're deeply extreme. So, like, perfectionism, for example, is a really violent way of being in the world, especially
to you and to others.
Yeah. Like, it's like, you can't even keep it to yourself. Like, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting other people that you're working with or interacting with. And that feels like a really violent symptom.
Yeah.
Right. A really harmful symptom of my own wounding and my own socialization that society has deemed not just acceptable, but it rewards me.
Yes.
For perfectionism. And so I'm also interrogating, like, my own really extreme, unhealthy coping mechanisms that also fall into, like, that category. But that dominant culture has said, that's fine, you're fine, you can do that,
Right.
And even, like, the ways in which we colonize spaces, when we take over and we take control, or we control bodies, or we tone police, like, dominant culture has said all of those things are acceptable. And it's bullshit, right? They're really deeply violent and harmful. And so anyway, like, I really appreciate that you named that, because that's part of my practice, is, like, in real time, like, really interrogating how I'm having trauma responses all the time, but my survival shaping looks a lot more like what dominant culture says is acceptable and normal. And it's not. It's fucked.
Right. Right. Yep. Yeah. Totally with you. Yeah. You'll really dig NARM. Happy to talk to you more about it.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Well, I want to make sure to respect your time and also ask the wounded healer question. Do you consider yourself a wounded healer?
In the book, I think somewhere in the book, it's 95,000 words. So, like, and there's a word in there somewhere.
How many words? I love it.
Oh my God. The way I know that is because the other day I was telling someone that I was like, there are 95,000 opportunities for me to have made a mistake in this book. Like, I was just like, oh, shit. It's really scary to, like, to write a book and to have it, enshrined. But in the book somewhere, I say something that I am both the wounded and the wounder. So I didn't use the word healing, but I said I am both the wounded and the wounder. And, I feel like that relates back to whiteness for me, and that, when I first started to unpack whiteness, I put so much focus on all of the ways I was like causing harm and hurting other people and all of like the material privilege and benefits and just like beating myself up on that front. And then I started to interrogate the cost of whiteness on my body and on my
Yep.
spirit and on my soul. And also like in the relationships with people who love me, right? And the cost of whiteness on my life and my community. And that's actually, I feel like, when things shifted for me in my own
Yes.
reckoning with whiteness, because it taught me that I have skin in the game
Yeah.
in a way that I didn't feel before, right? It was just like operating from guilt and shame and sort of like doing this kind of robotic, like, what's the thing I should do and what are people telling me to do?
Right.
And then I started to like dig really deep into what has whiteness cost me. So anyway, I share that because I feel like it relates to what you're saying about the wounded and the wounder.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone has that to some extent in different ways and disproportionately, of course. But like that was a really helpful teaching for me. And now, and I write about this in the book, I write about the cost of whiteness. And I was very uncomfortable when I wrote that section in the book, because I was like, people are not going to like this. Like,
Right.
I'm going
Right.
to get my ass kicked for writing this. But, I was like, whiteness is hurting white people too.
Yes.
And all evidence is pointing to that, not just with climate change, right? And the relationship between white supremacy and, climate degradation. But like, look at the insurrection, like, like people with guns are coming for all of us.
Right.
And the pandemic, and right. So it's like, I think that question, if you're a white-bodied person and you're really focused on other in dismantling whiteness or in your practice of understanding and unpacking whiteness, I think you should turn that on yourself. How is whiteness hurting you?
Exactly. That's the buy-in. Because people aren't going to care like globally unless it affects them.
And it's never just an individual question, right? Because
Right.
anything that hurts me hurts others, right? And so anyway, so that was game changing for me, and holding what you're naming, which is why I love your podcast and I love the conversation that you're really standing for, is like understanding that we are the impacted and the impacted, the wounder and the wounded, um, feels like a really healthy and human practice for all of us. And I think I imagine it's the thing that's going to help us move towards one another as we confront the many accelerating crises we are facing in our future. If we can start to see one another and be with one another in a different way, that's going to help us not just survive, but thrive together.
Are you into astrology at all?
Oh yeah. Hello, Mercury in retrograde right
Right.
now
I know, right?
during my book launch.
Right. So see if I can repeat what this guy said. I saw an astrologer last night and I was like, I'm dying. Like, I can't function in this climate, the Roe v. Wade stuff. I just feel like I'm feeling all of the fear of all the uterus holders in the world. But so what he was telling me last night, since we're in the Pluto return for the US, Pluto is in the second house. And he was like, this is the house of mine. It's mine. I want to do it my way. And I don't care about your way. It's like mine and like values, something like that. And he said, so this is the reckoning, right? This is why the mask thing was such a big deal, is that we continue to bring this piece up so that we have the opportunity to do something different and to think more collectively, because this country was founded on, I want what I want and I don't care how that impacts you. And that was really meaningful and helpful for me. And he's like, I don't know if we will, get out of this caring more about each other, but this is what's up right now.
I love that. And since we're both going really woo-woo,
yeah, go, please.
I rarely do this out loud. I'll give you another orientation that, I got hip to many, many years ago. And it's a book called It's a book called Awakening the Global Heart by Anodea Judith, who did
Eastern Body, Western Mind. Oh, yeah.
That's right. Great book. And I love the chakra system as a mapping, right?
Yes.
And astrology too is like not an escape or a bypass, but as a way to like be curious and ask different questions and see ourselves in different ways. Anyway, I love that stuff. And in this book, what she says is that we're stuck in the third chakra, which is like the adolescent, the power hungry, the power over, the me, highly individualistic, chakra. And that as as a species, right, in our evolution, like that's sort of where we're at. And the place we're going is the heart chakra. And that in between the third and the fourth chakra, the kind of solar plexus, the core, the meat chakra, and the heart chakra, which is like the connection and the relationship and the compassion chakra, is this thing called the rainbow bridge, which is, I'm not going to get this right for all the chakra scholars. I want to apologize if I'm misinterpreting.
Just go buy Anna Dea Judith's book, but here's the summary.
But it is said that like that journey from me to we, right? Like that is actually the call of our time, right? And I just want to like acknowledge, especially given like, because I'm with you, it's so hot right now and it feels like these really toxic ideologies, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, individualism, imperialism is like holding on for dear life right now. Like everything that we're seeing politically in our country is evidence of that.
Yep.
And the other thing we're seeing, right, is like the work of the heart. And we're seeing people get organized and we're seeing people find their voice and speak out. And we're seeing mutual aid groups pop up all over the place. And so we're also seeing another thing, I feel like, emerge that's beautiful and different and unique and evolving. And I just want to hold that, right? That like maybe for the rest of my life, there's going to be this push and pull, right? This like white supremacy trying to pull us backward and love and community trying to move us forward. And I think I just want to build a capacity and a courage to stand in the midst of that, like to just stand on that bridge and to learn how to walk it.
Beautifully said. Wonderful. So where do people buy the book? How do they follow you? Where do they hear more about you? You're so wonderful.
I think you're wonderful, by the way. I also love you. I learned so much from you in this podcast. Yeah, we're friends.
Aww.
So, well, you can buy the book anywhere, but I really want to encourage folks to buy the book from their local indie bookstore, because that feels really important. So, you can go to IndieBound and look up your local store and then just buy directly for them. Or you can walk into your indie bookstore. I love this idea and just be like, hey, do you have this book?
If not, can you order it for me? And
yeah, that's right.
Can.
I love that because get to know like your local bookstore. It feels like an important invitation. And then you can, I do a lot of work with CTZNWELL, which is CTZNWELL. I put out a newsletter once a week. I've been doing that for 5 years. That's fire and ruffles lots of feathers. But it's a really helpful for folks who are like, I sort of like what you're saying, like I can't keep track of all the like messed up things that are happening. Like, what do I need to know? And then what do I need to do? Like, that's sort of why we made this newsletter called Well Read. It was like, here's what you need to know. Here are the people you should be listening to and following. And here's what you can do this week, right?
Excellent.
Given what's happening right now. So we tried to make that offering for folks. And I'm just, I'm around. You can, my website is americandetox.co. And, I'm here for all of it, y'all. Like, reach out. Tell me how you like the book. Tell me what you need. Tell me what's happening and how we can move forward together. I'm first and foremost an organizer. I do not consider myself a writer, by the way. I just like wrote a thing because it was in my body.
Yep.
And I felt like I had to honor that. And I do lots of things, but I really believe first and foremost, I'm an organizer. I love to bring people together and I love to organize folks towards a shared goal and a shared future that we all deserve. And so if you're like, I want to be an organizer or I want to organize or I want to get with you, like I'm here for it.
Amazing. Well, I think this book is really important. Even only reading half of it so far, it's really important. It's really accessible.
Cool.
And I hope everybody reads it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what people think. And I'm really excited for the conversation that it inspires.
Exactly.
So let's keep talking.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It really was medicine that I needed today. So I'm really glad this happened today.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Told you that was juicy, right? To learn more about Carrie Kelly, you can visit our website at www.headhearttherapy.com/podcast. And as always, thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time. Bye.